Before we start today, I would like to acknowledge what is currently happening in the world. The current crisis is not one to remain silent about, and I really want to thank you all for being here. We hope that this series can help us all find some inspiration and knowledge so that together we can learn of ways to find more equality in our design community and in the world. Welcome to our Plugged In series by the Adelaide Project, a series of conversations focused on bringing inspiration to the creative community. I am your host, Clarissa Llanesa, interior and lighting designer, creative director, and certified oversharer. Every few weeks, I will be sitting down with creatives to talk about their experiences, what excites them, what makes them tick, uncovering the curiosities and dissecting the dynamic path that led them to where they are today. This week, I am excited to welcome Alexandra Pappas and Francesca Bastianini, founding partners of Sighte Studio, an architectural lighting design studio that collaborates with leading architects and interior designers to design elegant and effective environments based in Brooklyn, New York. With backgrounds in the performing arts, psychology, architecture, and business, they bring varied expertise to the studio's work that enables them to respond effectively to diverse project types and clients' expectations. Their interest expands past their studio practice through participation in outside forums, including education, both teach at Parsons, research, wait until you hear about their Go Honest project, and professional affiliations. I first met them while studying at Parsons, the New School for Design, where we spent countless all-nighters, worked on a few projects together, and very quickly became great friends. These two are always up to something good. From day one, I knew that they were going to be big. Not to toot my own horn or anything. Alex, Francesca, thank you so much for joining me here today. I could go on and on about you both and maybe air some dirty laundry, but I promise to keep this PG and professional.
Thank you so much for having us, Clarissa. We're happy to be here to chat with you today.
Well, thank you. So first of all, how are you guys doing with everything happening?
This is not what we expected when we first started talking about having this conversation, is it? We're hanging in there. It's a difficult time for everybody.
Yeah.
I think I very much appreciate your acknowledgement at the beginning of the session, and I think just to add a little bit to that, we would say from Sighte Studio that we also acknowledge that this crisis is happening, racial oppression and discrimination, particularly as played out in the police brutality that took place in Minneapolis last week with the murder of Mr. George Floyd. We're going to talk about some of the work that we've been doing in public space in terms of participatory design and equity in design during this conversation, which we had always intended to discuss. But we would be remiss to admit that the events of the last few days have certainly brought to light areas in our research and methods and design practices that we plan to revisit and respond to the problem of racism in our spaces very, very differently.
Thank you for that.
Yep.
And for both of you, what was something that you remember specifically of that time and that year? Especially now, I'm sure everybody's going to remember 2020 for many reasons. Is there anything from that year that you might remember? Music, culture. Do you recall anything specifically happening in the world that might have impacted you in the way you think and you work?
Yeah. So after undergrad, I moved to Baltimore, Maryland, to work at a regional theater there called Center Stage. And I mean, I can't believe how timely this is at the moment. But you know, like many American cities were and still are reconciling decades of socioeconomic disparity and racial disparity, and culturally, like a cultural touchstone would be, you know, HBO's The Wire was airing on TV while I was there living in Baltimore. And if any of you have not seen The Wire, you should, because it's amazing. And it was extremely accurate and extremely profound to be watching this play out on a fictional television show, but it being so close to home. I mean, I was living right downtown. My kitchen window looked at the city jail. And when I first moved there, I went and got a cup of coffee with a friend of mine's brother who was living there. And he literally drew me a map and said, "This is where you should and should not go," with a Sharpie. And he sort of drew a boundary of where it was appropriate for me to be.
Wow.
And over the 4 years that I lived there, I started exploring outside of that boundary, and that boundary also expanded with different areas of Baltimore getting developed over time. But one of the things that I noticed was that immediate change in the spatial experience and the environment as I crossed those boundaries. And it really made me sort of aware in a way that I'd never been aware of the public realm before, and how the public realm is not currently designed with equity for everyone in mind necessarily. And I was working in theater, and theater is wonderful, and it's a great way to express the human experience and all of that. But I was sort of like itching to get out of the black box of theater and address these conditions that I was seeing in Baltimore. And that's essentially what led me to move into architectural lighting. And I found the program at Parsons and kind of said, okay, let me pivot a little here and switch gears using the skill set that I already know to maybe address and help with these conditions that I was seeing there.
That's amazing. What about you, Cheska? Sorry.
When Clarissa says she has laundry, she also has old nicknames. So, well, so I'm thinking about during the time of my first job when I was, it has more to do specifically than like a cultural touch point or music. Like I have really broad taste in music, but some would say that it's so broad it's terrible because I like a little bit of everything. So something I like, you're not gonna like. So instead of that, I think one of the biggest things that was a shift in my perspective or my experience was moving to the US and going to Smith College, which was an all-women's college. And that, I went there, I picked that school because I wanted to study psychology and theater. And I knew that studying a double career was not something that you could do in Venezuela.
Which you know that this is where you're from. Francesca is from Venezuela.
I was born and grew up in Venezuela, and I moved to the States to go to college. And I had an inkling I was gay in high school. Also, Venezuela is not necessarily, especially not at that time, was not maybe the place where I felt the safest to explore or admit that. And I knew that Smith was going to be a safe space. I knew it was queer friendly. I knew it was a place where when I walked on campus, I was able to be more myself. So Smith was the right place for me, but what I didn't expect was that it was an environment that shifted my default. So we live in a world where there's not an expectation necessarily that women are going to fill all the roles, or that are necessarily able to or encouraged to fill all the roles. Whereas Smith, that's the default. Like all of your classmates, all of your friends, all of your, well, not all of your professors, but the majority of the professors, the college president, the staff, everybody who's doing the technical work in theater and not just like the light women's work was all women. And so that shifted my default. It made me more comfortable to explore in different areas. And just, it made, even though the world itself is not that bubble, because Smith is a wonderful place, but it's a bubble.
Yeah.
When I'm outside of it and I forget those things, it's easier for me to shift back to understand that it's possible for women to play multiple roles. For me, you know, being the co-owner, the co-founder of Sighte Studio, teaching as well, being a woman as a role model for other people who want to both teach and learn about lighting. In my role as Women in Lighting's ambassador for the US. I'm currently ending my term as the president for the Designers Lighting Forum of New York. So, but all things that allow me to have a rich professional life, a rich personal life, without having to think, oh, I can't do that. That's not for me. So I think that place and that time in my life made that a significant difference.
And then you both decided to do your architectural lighting masters at Parsons, which is where we met, and where you, correct me if I'm wrong, where you both met as well.
Yep.
Yeah, and can you tell me a little bit about this experience and, you know, what made you guys decide to start Sighte Studio afterwards together? What happened after school? I know you worked with Tillett, Nelson Jenkins, etc. So, you know, tell us a little bit about that. And yeah.
Yeah, Parsons is a phenomenal program. It's in New York City, right? So you're in the art and design culture mecca of the US. Inspiration everywhere. There's galleries and museums and concerts and restaurants. So, I mean, when we did manage to get out of the studio, on the rare, we should have gotten out more is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. But, you know, we had, you know, so much at our fingertips. We were taught by working professionals, you know, lighting design leaders. And so that gave us direct access to firm principals and senior designers and people who are out working, doing this professionally. While we were there, Derek Porter was the director of the program, and he really pushed an emphasis on conceptual thinking and development. So we were really pushed to explore that and develop that sense of our design practice, and you know, relate any decision that we made back to a concept and make sure that our work was rooted that way. And that certainly continues to the work that we do at Sighte Studio today. Francesca and I met because we sat next to each other in studio, and we quickly learned we both had theater backgrounds. We had, you know, a lot of other common interests, and yeah, so we just became really good friends. And then we stayed very good friends after graduation, when we both went to work for separate firms in New York City. And now we both teach at Parsons, so things have gone full circle there.
I'm sure there's some students here as well.
Oh, hi guys. And yeah, I mean, we'd sort of joked while we were in school, like, oh, someday we'll start our own firm together, or, you know, we'll have some kind of great practice. And it was about 6 years after we had graduated and gone out into the world and worked for other people that we sort of came back together in a professional sense. We'd stayed friends and saw each other all the time, but there was kind of a moment where we both said, like, it's time, let's do it. Yeah.
I'm gonna condense a few of these questions to, I want to really take the time to go over, you know, the essence of what you are as Sighte Studio. So is there any way we can talk a little bit about one of your projects that you can share with us? And, maybe at the same time, talk about how if you connect lighting, design, and emotions, and how you think one affects the other, and how the technology's evolved, and just talk a little bit about, walk us through one of your projects, your work in process, through it, some takeaways, from
Sure.
what you
Get Log Haven first?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
And yeah. Well,
I think it's a beautiful project. I really want everybody to see the essence of your work. It addresses a lot of different things.
Okay.
That could lead us afterwards to Gowanus as well.
Sure. Yeah. This is the Log Haven Artist Residency in Knoxville, Tennessee. And this was a really great collaboration with Sanders Space Architecture out of Knoxville, and Stephen Wackney Landscape Architects, and the client, the Aslan Foundation, who were a really interesting client. They're a foundation out of Knoxville, and in our first meeting, they admitted to us that they are really interested in beautiful spaces, and that they will often value aesthetic over function, which was great, and that really opened up a lot of possibilities for us with this project. So to give you a little context, Log Haven is located on a forested ridge just south of downtown Knoxville, and it is part of several parcels of land that the Aslan Foundation is now stewarding in order to maintain a kind of natural space surrounding downtown Knoxville, to limit some of the development that's happening, and also to create a larger sort of connected park system or trail system around the city. This is the campus of Log Haven, and you'll see what's outlined in red here was our original scope of the project, which is the site for a new gateway building that would house a sort of gathering space, working studio space, and a gallery in it. And to the right of the image, those smaller buildings are existing cabins that had been used historically for loggers who were working in the area to live and stay in during the season while they were logging. And so we first got to the site, and despite the fact that we had been given a clear scope as in the red area, we of course had to look at the bigger context of where we were working and make sure that we were connecting our piece to the whole campus. And one of the issues we noted was that the gateway building was going to be a little bit farther away from the cabins than we had initially expected, and that was amplified at night in the dark because this is such a rural context. And we had actually originally said we should light that pathway in the middle there, right, exactly, to connect these two spaces. And Aslan said, no, I think they were afraid of it feeling more like overlit, like a park or a neighborhood street, and they wanted to really maintain that kind of like rural natural landscape. And so they at first said, no, we don't want to light that. So we sort of went back to the drawing board, and zooming in on the gateway building itself here, we said, well, what other way can we kind of connect these spaces? And the concept became that the gateway building would become a lantern in the landscape, and that we would light the exterior of it so that it could be used as a kind of like nighttime wayfinding device, and that it would always be in view of the outer cabins. The other thing we decided to do was limit any added fixtures to the landscape. So we didn't want to put in bollards or post-top lanterns that would have their own kind of language. And instead we wanted to integrate lighting fixtures into architecture and into plantings in the landscape. And that led to this idea of creating a custom fixture that we could integrate into these low stone walls that were being designed as part of the landscape around the gateway building. And so we designed these pieces, and then we worked with a company called Range Projects out of Chattanooga to fabricate them and then they were integrated into these walls, and they become sort of, again, this kind of wayfinding light, path lighting that actually helps people to travel along these pathways, but sit very discreetly within the language, the sort of material language of the new building and of the natural space. The next up, so again, sort of going back to this idea of building as lantern, we decided to light the exterior of this building and really do sort of more facade lighting than one might typically think of for a space like this. And so these are some elevations that we did at the beginning of the project to express the intent, and we had a few layers of facade lighting. The L1s were lights that were tucked up into the eave of the building to wash the vertical surfaces. The L2s were integrated into the windowsills to highlight this, where there's fenestration, so that the building would feel occupied even when it was empty and the interior lights might be off. And then maybe most importantly, the L3s at the end of the building lit up these end gables, which are the two sort of primary services that you would experience on one side when you're entering the campus from Log Haven Drive, and on the other side when you're in the cabins. That's really the end of the building that you see. So if you go to the next slide, another fabulous thing about having such great clients is that they were in full support of us doing full-scale mock-ups of the space, which
That's amazing.
yeah, which is very rare. And their space really, stewarded this along. There was a portion of the gateway building that you see here was fabricated at full scale, and then we were able to get lighting fixture samples and install them, and then look at them on site, installed, so that we could verify all of the parameters that we were looking at, and not just color temperature and beam spread, and making sure that they were focusable in the way that we needed. But a big piece of it was output, because we were really sort of towing this line of lighting this thing up like a lantern, but wanting it to not be overly lit for this context of this sort of wooded rural campus, right? So we wanted to make sure that the output that we were choosing was just enough to make the visual statement, but we didn't cross that line into it being too bright and feeling strange. And so we were able to go look at these lumen outputs, look at actual dimming levels, and verify that everything was going to work out well. And not just in like a lab, but on site, from close, from far, from way down, so that was really exciting. So this is a rendered view that we did of the building at the very beginning of the project to express the concept to the clients. And then this was an image that Francesca took while we were on site doing the aiming and adjusting of the project. So
very accurate.
It worked.
It's an iPhone quality photo, so not final, but
Right.
As it's getting to dusk, what you see.
And then, moving inside, this is, we wanted to just kind of show other ways that we communicate lighting, and sometimes it's just these sort of simple hand sketches where we can start to express the various layers of light that we're looking at inside, whether that's highlighting vertical surfaces and displays, or getting lighting up into kind of like architectural details, and then how decorative might sort of fall on top of that, and so that we can kind of explain to the clients in a kind of rough visual sense about what they can expect in terms of composition and that sort of thing.
I love the layered quality of this project. And it's something that we discussed in our last session with Claudia Capel about the layering and the pause and the contrast, and that's what I love a lot about this project. It's the fact that you can experience all of that.
Thank you. So that's an image of the finished, completed living room of the Gateway building. And then, So if you remember at the very beginning of this, I said we had recommended that we light that pathway.
Yeah.
And as very often happens in landscape, we're asked to pull back, and then the lighting is installed and the construction is complete, and then the clients say, oh, feels dark, let's add more light. So once the gateway building was built, they asked us to come back in and indeed make recommendations to light some of these sort of longer distances of pathway where there wasn't an existing structure that was lit. And so we started to make recommendations that included like maintaining those original concepts about keeping things natural. Any added fixtures needed to be like very little design language, very simple aesthetic, and using natural elements like trees to create these kind of like visual cues. So we weren't ever lighting pathways continuously with even light. It was more like a trail marker, so you kind of like see the next illuminated piece ahead, and you can navigate at night, but without it feeling overly lit. And then that's the gateway building right as it opened.
Amazing. I love it. And I know that when we were talking about Longhaven and bringing in Gowanus, I know that there's several things that intertwine with this project and Gowanus. So I know that's what we're going to be discussing next. But when we're talking about it, can we touch base on things that you can identify that you maybe took from one to the other as well?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think Francesca, while you pull up Gowanus, I think a big piece of it is Longhaven is this sort of rural, dark area, and although it's a public space in the sense that it's not like a private residence, people who go there will be, it won't be just sort of like open to the public all the time. It's mainly for the artists in residence, and there will be invited public events, but it's not necessarily like a community space. Shifting to Gowanus, we're looking at a very different context here of a urban environment that is the public right of way, like the streetscape essentially in a big city. And so there's a lot of very different ways to think about this. And with that, I'll turn it over to Francesca.
Yep, and people trying to call while we're having a presentation. So one of the things that, Clarissa, I think also part of us setting up Sighte Studio is that with projects like Gowanus, this was a initially self-funded project that we started. It was a research project. There was no client. There was no scope or goal. Specifically at the beginning, we had an interest. We located our studio in the Gowanus neighborhood of Brooklyn. And to give you a little bit of context, this is an overview, sort of like a larger scale of the 5 boroughs of New York City, and Gowanus is located in Brooklyn, right here. And when you zoom in, it's located in sort of this valley between Carroll Gardens and Park Slope, which is two much more affluent neighborhoods. And Gowanus is historically this industrial warehouse area that is a vibrant neighborhood, but because of that sort of warehouse and less property value, and including public housing that has not been as valued, it has been sort of considered a ripe area for redevelopment. You know, the idea that if something isn't polished and clean, then it needs to be fixed. And zooming in a little bit further, you can see even in the sort of typography in this map of the area around this canal, that things don't look as like neat and clean as the brownstones on either end. But why Gowanus? I mean, we both love this neighborhood. Alex lived there. We both socialized here. It's a weird place because it has this super polluted canal in the middle of it. but it also has warehouses of light industry with incredible makers. We have our office in a building that has a lot of artist studios in it, a lot of other designers. It is in some ways more diverse than the surrounding neighborhoods. And it's a place that I think is beautiful. It is also an incredibly polluted site. And like, I don't want to underestimate that. I think that things that are this sort of like decay porn that people go after, I'm guilty of that as well, but it's a beautiful place within the city. But it has this industrial past where there was heavy industry, heavy polluting from all of the companies that were alongside of it, as well as the traffic in the canal. That industry has left or has changed. And in addition to what was left over from that industry, the canal has combined sewer overflow. And so often you'll see both a combination of oil and sewage. So it's not always a pleasant place, and it doesn't always smell pleasant, but the neighborhood itself is amazing, and not one that I think a lot of people have ignored for a while. Other people speculated and said, this is the next Venice. Like, there's a waterway that is underdeveloped. I'm a developer. This is going to be the next place. One of the things that sort of saved Gowanus from having been developed so far was actually the recession in 2008, or the economic crash and the recession, because at the point in 2010, it was deemed a Superfund site by the EPA for being so polluted. But between the recession and all the work that would have to be done to remediate, to clean up all the sites, the canal itself and all the sites, people sort of like stopped and didn't develop it. And right now, given COVID-19 and the economic impacts, there's a chance that that might also happen again, because otherwise it is currently being rezoned by the city and developers, going from light industry all the way around the canal to what is now this sort of like mixed use, commercial on the bottom and residential on top. And what that looks like in terms of heights is warehouses that are 1 to 2 story Brooklyn town, typical Brooklyn brownstones that are a few stories, to 22-story buildings. And this is a visualization by Gowanus by Design. What that looks like along a canal where currently you see sky everywhere is that sort of like coming in and closing in. And obviously, when you have that much density arriving at a neighborhood that doesn't have that current, that isn't in that state currently, the impacts on infrastructure, the impact on the character of the neighborhood, and what happens to the people that are living there, which is, I'm not saying anything new about gentrification, but this whole process of redevelopment is one that impacts the community. It is an incredibly vibrant community. It is incredibly diverse. Part of that diversity comes from the neighborhoods on either side. It also has 2 NYCHA housing campuses that are located here on these maps. And that public housing is also, there's parks, there's other infrastructure that's in the neighborhood, which will obviously change if that development goes forward. The people who are interested in what the neighborhood looks like is huge. And that's one of the other things about why we wanted to go further in work with Gowanus, is because there are already so many people who care about it. People within the community that are interested in the arts, that are interested in the ecology. So the Gowanus Canal Conservancy, both in terms of the watershed, and this is an area that is low and floods often. During Sandy, there was a tremendous floods within the area, as well as neighborhood residents. So the women that are here are from the Gowanus Neighborhood Coalition for Justice. The public housing campuses were not included as part of the rezoning framework. So huge populations of residents in the neighborhood were not considered as part of the framework. They were invited to conversations. They were incredibly active. They would show up at all sorts of public hearings with their own chairs so that they could be front and center and they could be heard. But the actual location of the public housing was not included. And so in terms of the question of equity and who we are designing for, bringing attention to the people who are being left out of those conversations is incredibly important. And also understanding all the different layers. So at the city, state, and federal level, there's a lot of different players. They have different funding, they have different goals. So to understand us as lighting designers, how we work with them. And our expertise is the nighttime environment. We're looking at daylighting as well, but we as lighting designers were the people who were asking a question that other people weren't, because that's not their lens. What happens at night was, how does this neighborhood change in terms of the public lighting, as well as the lighting that will be part of development in the, at night, and how does that impact people's sense of place, sense of belonging, safety, security, and ability to navigate a space that is both physiologically, emotionally, and healthy for them. There's a lot of context. I'll go through this quickly. We started with a tactic that's not new. Survey is part of what a lot of lighting designers do, but part of it was an idea that we were going to start with a survey of the existing conditions so that we were here for a long term. It's a longitudinal study. We want to know what the neighborhood is like now, what happens during development, and what happens afterwards, so that we can also say, how do cities change when density increases? What happens to lighting and the way that city agencies and the community come together to work? So here we have some of our volunteers who were helping us with surveys. We took different metrics of quantitative lighting as well as qualitative lighting. We did a pilot study of different areas that had different characteristics. They were commercial, more industrial, new residential, old residential, to have a mix. And some of the additional documentation included elevations, so patching together elevations of full blocks, so we have a sense of what's existing, the color temperatures, the quality of light, where the light sources are, taking down all the notations, and then developing a way of presenting this language so that we have an understanding of the existing conditions and comparing them to the city's guidelines, so that we know whether we're working with the city or whether these areas are actually performing the way that the city says that they should be, and whether we want to question some of those guidelines, which is what this is sort of old residential and one newer development that had gotten passed on a waiver. Looking at the luminaires too. So this is right by the canal. There's a lot of light falling on the canal. Does there need to be that much light? Are the fixtures actually performing the way that they should be? If there's an importance about being able to see people's faces, do these luminaires perform to do that? You can see myself and Matt modeling. And working with other agencies like Gowanus by the Design to start to accumulate that information. They're the group that developed this atlas, the Gowanus Atlas, that allows you to overlay different information, including demographics, which you see the NYCHA public housing, which is outlined to note also that it's a big part of the neighborhood, but not included. And one of the things that we're interested in is figuring out ways as next steps to include NYCHA as part of the design conversation. Other agencies are doing it as well. We're not saying that we're the only ones. And clearly even the residents are interested as well. We're just trying to make sure that the lighting conversation as one of the biggest sort of visual indicators is included, where you see areas around it that have been updated to different technology using LED streetlights. They're still using high pressure sodium streetlights attached to the building as if they were a pedestrian scale fixture. We have already put out recommendations to city planning as an initial sort of review of the zoning and what we would recommend. What we are also working with Gowanus Canal Conservancy, Scape Landscape, Architecture, to work with them on the master plan for this area, as the Gowanus Canal Conservancy will be one of the people who maintains this area and the parks that are created as the right of way around the canal. So as a private entity who's maintaining something which is prone to flooding, which has a lot of different private owners, how do we manage those expectations? How do we manage the maintenance and longevity of fixtures, both from the aesthetic point as well as their performance and how they connect to create a cohesive public space? This is a rendered view that we put together also to talk about how lighting is a communication tool to show the connection points between the different neighborhoods, how they go from one side to the other. How do you deal with the park that will sort of hug the canal? And are there ways for us to connect these public housing campuses so that they feel inclusive and you don't feel like, everybody feels like they're able to navigate this space and not left out of it. This is a rendered view that we had developed sort of to respond to a day view that had been created by GCC and Scape, thinking about lighting, which was not included yet in those images, and how that public space will engage the waterfront, community spaces, and what other opportunities there are. Again, wanting to focus on, this is a long sort of large term master plan, but an approach that we want to make sure that we take to our other works. When your question about how we connect this to Log Haven, it's overall the methodology, considering context, considering who's there, how it's going to be used, and the longevity past when we stop touching the project. A part of that is also for us identifying areas which don't function, where lighting is being used as a weapon more than it is to maintain safety. So
and what do you mean by that?
So what you're seeing is images of the NYPD high bay masts. These are generator fixtures that you would typically find for roadway, highway lighting.
Yeah.
They are at minimum 1,000 kilowatts, 1,000 watts per fixture, and they are high glare fixture. They're meant to be mounted a lot higher, and they're normally located lower, straight into people's windows or on sidewalks. This was a temporary solution for crime reduction in 2016. It has been deployed more and more, and it has become permanent. 2020 does not make it, if you started using this as a temporary solution in 2016 and you still are using it and increasing the use in 2020, then it's not temporary, and it is being used to stop people from loitering and gathering, and also to signal problem areas according to the police. That's an issue that we think is crucial to be able to have a more inclusive and equitable city, specifically in New York, but I know that this happens elsewhere in different ways. So I want to reiterate something that Clarissa, you started with, and that Alex said, that this is where we are now. It's the work that we've been interested in from the beginning, but we also know that we need to revisit our understanding and the way that we respond to this, particularly the problems of racism and oppression in the way that we design. We've included a couple of links to groups and agencies that we think are important because they're also part of our local environment. So as an example, the YWCA in Brooklyn, its mission is to end racism and empower women. We've also included places like the Design Trust for Public Space, and the Project for Public Spaces, agencies that are committed to public space making and equitable design, as well as Bedside Strong and Communities United for Police Reform. So all ones that I think, and definitely not exhaustive, but ones that we think are a good place for people who are curious about, like, okay, so what's next? What can I do to learn more?
Yes.
As a starting point. So that was a lot, but
no, yeah, but I think it's important for me to note that we have a duty as designers, whether, you know, as lighting designers, to create a better environment, a better community, to make people feel safe, to help people enjoy that extra glass of wine. As lighting designers, as architects, as interior designers, you know, we're not police, we're not doctors, we're not anything else, but we do affect all of that. Mm-hmm. So I think it is important for us to have this conversation. I think it's important for everybody that's here attending to I think the project, the research it's beautiful. It's important, especially to talk about it right now. I think, you know, this is the whole point of the Plugged In series, to be able to talk about these topics and even more, and not just to feel inspired, but to learn. A lot of people don't understand the importance of lighting design, or of lighting in general, and it goes so much further than what most people, even designers, know. Mm-hmm. So thank you for that. Yeah. And I just want to, because we've exceeded a little bit of time because everything's been so good, but also because we're three. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to put them on the chat, raise your hands, and mention if you would like to be unmuted. Some of you might not be used to discussing some of these issues that we're bringing up, you know, with guanas, etc., especially in lieu of what's happening in the world right now. So feel free to ask any questions, even if they're about that. We encourage for you to take this time to start the conversation. So anybody has any questions that you guys would like to ask, other than me? I want to know, if you guys weren't a lighting designer, what would you be, before questions start popping by here?
What would I be if I wasn't a lighting designer? I mean, right now I'm like, I just want to go be a farmer. I'm gonna go live in the middle of nowhere. Chickens.
It's like me, I want to sell fruit on the side of the road with a wide brimmed hat. Yeah. So somebody has a question from Jessie Coletta. Have you seen funding support come from your reviews and recommendations of guanas?
It's important to note that we did receive a faculty research grant from the New School, and that was a major help in funding our work that we were doing in terms of the survey and collecting data, and then having help to produce some of the documentation that we made. We are still actively looking for additional funding for some next steps. But we did, one sort of very positive piece of it is that we did send out our response to the zoning that you can find on our website, and read the whole response if you're interested. We sent that out to several politicians and agencies in Brooklyn and in the city, and we did receive response from the Brooklyn Borough President's Office that was really positive, and which helped direct us towards some other agencies that we might have opportunities to collaborate with, like the New York City DOT. So we're hoping that can lead into some pilot study, perhaps. Otherwise, yeah, we're still actively looking for funding for some more future endeavors. We're considering an event that would be in collaboration with some of the local organizations, like the Gowanus Dredger. Yeah, and something, you know, really to sort of like celebrate the nighttime and get people sort of considering night. You know, I think we're gonna have to kind of reconsider some of this now as well, because the events of the last few days have certainly kind of reframed a bit of nighttime for me, and how we're considering it, that it's not necessarily always, you know, sort of like the magic of darkness.
Claudia Capel is actually here. Claudia here, thank you for sharing your exciting projects and personal path. She has two questions. One, I am curious to hear how, as a small women-led business, you got involved in the kind of master plan projects as you described. And two, if surveying is part of your process, do you negotiate this to be paid work or part of the outline proposal? Or do you manage to include students and with an intrigued, young, curious talent to get involved to tackle the scope?
Great question. It varies. For Gowanus, it was really a self-led initiative at the beginning. And we started with the survey work, and then once we put that together, we started to present it at Light Fair and Leducation and other sort of lighting conferences. We were actually slated to present at South by Southwest as part of a panel this year, which was canceled due to coronavirus. But then we took the information that we sort of gotten ourselves, and we like just cold called the other organizations that we knew were working in this space, and Gowanus Canal Conservancy was really interested in the work that we were doing, and sort of brought us in to become part of the team that was working on the Lowlands Master Plan. And that was just calling them up and saying, hey, we're already thinking about this. Can we be of help? We're also working on one site on the canal that is a new privately owned development that will be a creative working space. And again, because we had already been working on this, we were brought in to participate as the site lighting consultants for that. So I think you got like some of it is just sort of like going out there and like sort of like forcing your foot in the door and then proving that you know what you're talking about at least a little bit. Otherwise, we did get students involved in the Gowanus survey. We had originally been speaking with a community organizer in Gowanus. The group is called Trellis. And we'd been speaking with them because they have a lot of connections with the public schools in the neighborhood, because we wanted to actually get high school students involved in the survey process to kind of introduce them to light and lighting design, but also to sort of like remind them that they have agency and that they should have a say in their home environment and the neighborhoods that they're living in. And so we were able to go into some high schools and talk to the students and do presentations. And then actually Trellis was actually able to get some funding to pay them for their time, which was pretty extraordinary. So yeah, I guess, Francesca, anything else?
Well, but I think on a larger scope, we do always have, as part of our projects that are part of our contracts, basis of design and survey, sort of like an understanding of the site or the scope of the project to understand context before we get started. So like that's part of like the methodology from the beginning, because coming in with this like your ego, I have a great idea, I don't think is part of our ethos or our working methodology. So yes, we do have survey as part of our projects, and the way that we get involved with sort of larger scale projects, even though we're a small business, is we maintaining connections and being able to be flexible to work on projects of all scales. Being small means that we're nimble, but it also means that we get to decide sort of the kind of work that we want to focus on. Yeah, and I think, you know, that's true.
No, thank you. Rebecca has, your fellow ambassador has a question. How many people do you have in your studio during this time of work from home? How do you keep your team motivated, inspired, etc., while all working remotely?
Yeah. So we have 3 people, including ourselves. We're a small firm. One of the things that we had sort of talked about when we were thinking about this is, for us, part of the studio has never been about being big, but always like growth when it was needed. And it's one of the things that currently we've had to revisit, to be very frank and honest. Like, we've had to furlough one of our employee to make sure that he is supported financially while we are waiting on projects to restart because of projects that were shut down during construction pause. And yeah, but I think communication amongst the 3 of us, having check-ins, utilizing tools like Zoom and all the other, and Slack, so that we have different ways of checking in and not making them as formal. We can do a daily check-in, but we can also send quick messages. That allows us to also check in beyond what's happening on the project, what's happening emotionally and for everyone.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
humans working together.
Yeah. I'll
Yeah.
also add that when we started the studio 4 years ago, we set it up like almost immediately with the kind of like flexible capacity that we have now. So when we had to go remote from home, it like we essentially didn't really have to change anything.
Yeah.
And part of the reason we did that was when we first started, I was a new mother of a small child, and I like needed that flexibility and was going to be working from home a fair bit. And so the infrastructure of our studio was already set up in terms of like file sharing and workstations, and we work off of laptops with separate screens so we can go anywhere. And that's just kind of part of like the ethos of our firm, is that we're not tied to be sitting at a single desk in this single office all the time.
Hi, Alex. What do you think about your lighting design studio identity philosophy separating other designers?
What do you think about your lighting studio philosophy separating other designers? I'm not sure.
If I understand the question, like, what makes Sighte Studio different?
Yeah.
Yeah, is that it? Okay. Oh gosh, a few things. I mean, I would say we're women, we're not the only women partnership lighting firm there is, and in New York City or anything like that. But I think we have a unique point of view because of a lot of things that we've spoken about, and particularly our desire to work in public space and look at things like participatory design and ethics and equity in design. And as we look to the future, I think one of our sort of like long-term goals is to be able to continue to do this self-initiated work, where we don't always necessarily need a client who's bringing a problem to us, but that we ourselves are able to go out and look for things that we think we can assist with. And so I look at firms like Mass Design out of Cambridge, an architecture firm up there, and the sort of way that they do work, and that's something that we're certainly interested in. We're also like, we're like a unique age, I think, because we grew up in the analog world and now but switched into the digital world at a prime time, so we're like very well versed and literate in terms of like digital and media and software and all that stuff, but we also have that like that childhood experience of physicality and using your hands, especially both of us coming out of theater where we had hands-on light fixtures all the time. So there's like a sort of even like subconscious understanding of material and texture and space that comes from that. I think
to jump in, I think education is part of our studio, because we're both teachers, whether that is at Parsons or as guest lecturers or in different courses as well. And it's a crucial part of every project with clients. Like, we have to have conversations about lighting, because lighting is not something that you touch, it's something that you experience. And so that's part of every project and every conversation with a client. So education and learning ourselves new ways that lighting can be used, and then finding ways to communicate that visually, graphically, through mock-ups, all the different ways that allow more people to understand, as opposed to making it a smaller and smaller niche, expanding that understanding.
I think I'd like to add to that as well, me, not just as a friend, but as a colleague. I think, I mean, the beginning of the conversation, we spoke about your backgrounds. I think what makes you unique is also you both as a person. You're very particular individuals that are strong women, go-getters. You are, both of you, don't take no easily as an answer. And, you know, you're hands-on. Like, Alex was climbing on a ladder, like this little girl climbing on a thing in like our lighting lab at school. And like you said, going from analog to digital, but still wanting to learn and participating in research and education and lectures. And I think I would be very proud to see, first of all, I'm very proud of the two of you and to be able to call you also my friends, but also I would be very proud to see more of that in the design community. I think it is hard for us to sit here for an hour and talk about this and listen to somebody else sometimes, but I think it's important for us to do that, to see what brings you where you are today. How did you get there and why? Nothing comes easy. And there's so many of us now with a little bit of a higher education, because things can be more accessible if you want them. But what's going to make you stand out is that ability of getting your hands dirty, having sensitivity to what's happening in the world and wanting to react to it. I think that's very important, and especially nowadays. So I am very grateful for you guys being here. I am very excited to see what Gowanus ends up with. Who knows? And especially nowadays, I hope it gets the attention that it deserves. I know Alex is currently sitting on her mattress because she is moving to Miami. So to Florida, Palm Beach. Sighte Studio is going to have a secondary office, which if you guys want to say something more about that, but I really want to thank you guys. I know we've exceeded our time, so thank you for all 30 plus of you that are still here. And thank you for the amazing questions. If you guys have any more questions, you can always email it to us. I'll make sure to pass it to Alex and Francesca. And anything else that you guys would be wanting to share?
I mean, a quick thank you to you and to the LA project for having this space and continuing the series. I think all you said about the goals and how we share ideas, and we want to be open and vulnerable and honest with our experience so that others can benefit from it.
Mm-hmm.
But thank you.
Yeah, I just would second that. Thank you so much for creating this space for discussion, and thanks to everybody who logged in to hear us talk.
We hope we can have you guys over here soon, because we've been planning a workshop eventually where we can all get our hands dirty and be students again and really learn about, like, you know, touching the light and feeling it and the effects that actually they have. So maybe next year we'll be able to do that here at the Adelaide, and we'd love to have you guys join. So thank you, and yeah,
Great.
I hope you guys stay safe. Good luck with starting your new venture to both of you. If there's any projects in Palm Beach, guys, Sighte Studio is the way to go. Or
Call us.
And if there's any other questions, feel free to send us an email. And if you guys want to see somebody else come join the conversation, please send us some names of who you would like to see us talk with. And Francesca, Alex, as always, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.